3 Lives, 3 Worlds, Lotus Steps Book 3. One Step for 1,000 Kalpas. Chapter 21. By Tangqi. 30,000 years ago, Sangji and Chang'e broke into the tower, causing the demon-locking tower to collapse. The Heavenly Lord has always been humiliated by this. After rebuilding the demon-locking tower, he doubled the number of heavenly generals to guard the tower, just to guard against anyone else. Not knowing the heights of the world, he rushed into the tower and caused a big mess. I don't know if it's because the heavenly generals were too incompetent or something else. When Zhu Ti rushed to the demon-locking tower, she saw that a dozen or so silver-armored heavenly generals had all been hacked to pieces. They were sleeping all over the place without knowing what was going on. There was Yanlan, who was guarding the tower soberly, with an anxious look on his face, and his eyes lit up when he saw her. However, Zhu Ti had no time to pay attention to Yanlan and only glanced at her briefly before entering the tower directly. It was also her first time to enter the demon-locking tower. When you are in the tower, everything is pitch black and occasionally the screams of monsters reach your ears, which makes you feel uncomfortable. Zhu Ti raised her hand, and several pearls appeared in the air, illuminating the world here. It turned out to be a deep corridor, with a stone door standing at the end of the corridor, and some arrows scattered randomly in the corridor. There is a magic circle here. Zhu Ti quietly looked at the arrows on the ground for a while, and basically understood what kind of magic circle had been set up in the corridor. The magic circle used to deal with people naturally needs to be activated by people. She guessed that if she took another step forward, the magic circle would be triggered as soon as her shoes touched the ground, so she stopped her steps and jumped up. Her movement was extremely fast. Like a ray of light released the arrow, she had already swept across the corridor and stood in front of the stone door at the end of the corridor. The stone gate is very strong, and I don't know what kind of stone it is made of. Of course, you can also try to use magic to break it, but thinking that it would make things worse, it would be better not to destroy the internal structure of the tower, so she stood there and carefully studied the mechanism to open the door. After pondering for a moment, he tried to turn the dark iron object like a ship's rudder on the right side of the door half a turn inward, and boom, the door opened. Zhu Ti stepped in and the door slammed shut again. Many cell doors were designed to close immediately after opening the door. There was nothing novel about it, so she didn't pay much attention to it and just raised her eyes to look inside. After seeing the situation in the room clearly, her eyes darkened slightly. This is an ice prison. The 6 sides of the prison are made of solid ice and a biting coldness hits your face. Zongrong was lying unconscious not far away. A man in red squatted in front of her, holding her chin with one hand. He must have been disturbed by the sound of the stone door opening. He raised his eyes slightly and looked towards the door. The man is the vine demon. Just when the man was looking over, Zhu Ti moved her left sleeve, and a long white silk flew out from the sleeve, as fast as a stream of light, wrapped around Bingrong's waist, and rolled her up in an instant. There was nothing in front of the vine demon for a moment. He was stunned, stood up, looked at Zhu Ti, raised his eyebrows and smiled. What kind of luck do you have today? 2 beauties actually threw themselves into the trap. But I'm a little curious, what are these guards from the God clan? How do you guard this demon-locking tower? From time to time, you deliver some spiritual training materials to me. Are you afraid that I won't be able to break through this demon-locking formation? Because she didn't want to cause trouble, Zhu Ti was very polite, even though the words of the vine demon were very disrespectful. She supported Zongrong and said calmly, "My sister accidentally broke into this place and startled Mr. Xiang. It was not my intention. I will take her away now, please. Don't blame me, sir." However, the vine demon was very ungrateful, and his face turned grave. "Now that you have come here and caught my eye, do you still want to leave?" As he spoke, he grabbed his right hand, and a long whip glowing red appeared in his palm. Zhu Ti frowned slightly and let go of Bo Rong. When she let go of Bo Rong, the white silk in her hand turned into a light shield, firmly protecting Bo Rong, who was lying on the ice again. The long whip in the hands of the vine demon attacked with lightning speed. The whip threw several phantoms in the air. The sound resounded through the stone tower, causing thousands of demons to roar, which was extremely terrifying. Zhu Ti's movements were also very fast. Although she kept retreating to avoid the whip, she was not embarrassed. After the Vine Demon's 6 whips were swung, she had mastered his rhythm and hid very calmly. As she moved, a golden light moved with her steps, looming, and whenever she stood still, the light disappeared. The Vine Demon didn't pay much attention to those lights. Although Zuri had dodged more than a dozen of his lashes, which made him a little surprised, seeing that the other party could only dodge but not attack, he thought she just had more flexible legs and feet. When he swung the 14th whip, he took advantage of the opportunity to get close to Zhu Ti, stared into her eyes, and smiled softly. "Is this all you can do?" While whispering like this, he used the spell of enchantment. The black-clothed fairy lying on the ground had just resisted him a few times and was finally subdued by him like this. He was convinced that he had looked into her eyes and planted the evil spell in her soul that would make her surrender to him. However, this beautiful fairy with a special appearance did not seem to be disturbed by a spell at all, eyes still clear and clear. This should never be the case. The Vine Demon was stunned and suddenly frightened. At this time, Zhu Ti had already dodged the 17th whip wielded by the Vine Demon and took the final step. The steps he had just moved when dodging the whip, after the step, took the form of several segments of light, connected end to end, suddenly rising into the air, bursting out with dazzling golden light. Golden light filled the entire ice prison, and after the dazzling layer of light receded, a complex 7-star spell appeared. In other words, this female fairy, while dodging his sharp whip, used her footwork to draw a spell. When the Vine Demon realized this, his pupils shrank suddenly. He had never seen this charm before, and he didn't know what it was used for. Alert to the danger, he suddenly stepped back, trying to stay away from the spell. At the same time, he jerked his whip, and the steel whip in his hand suddenly grew several times in size. Logically speaking, it is extremely difficult to swing such a long whip, and it is also difficult to quickly transfer the force to the tail of the whip to deliver a severe blow, but the long whip of the Vine Demon Master is still flexible. While Zhu Ti was turning sideways, the Vine Demon whipped her again, at a tricky angle. Zhu Ti lowered her waist to avoid it, with her body level with the ground. The steel whip brushed against her waist and rolled down a piece of her clothes. The Vine Demon was heartbroken. Hi! Just as she was about to add another whip, she summoned a huge bow from her waist down, suddenly pulled the string, and shot an arrow. The Vine Demon felt a little funny. How could such a big bow be used for close attack? What's more, her arrow missed the target and actually hit. No, the Vine Demon suddenly raised his head and saw that the arrow was like lightning, and it pierced through quickly. After passing the 7-star talisman, golden light exploded. She obviously shot only one arrow, but in the golden light, thousands of arrow shadows appeared. The Vine Demon panicked and quickly retracted his offensive, quickly waving the steel whip in his hand in a defensive posture, hoping to repel the incoming arrows. Most of the light arrows were shot down by his whip. However, the 7-star talisman was not broken, and the arrow rain continued. After a while, 2 light arrows found a flaw and passed through his body due to the exertion of the whip. The body-protecting chi pierced his right shoulder hard. The arrow had great momentum, taking him back several steps, and finally pinned him firmly to a large black stone in the middle of the ice prison. The Vine Demon suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. Although he was seriously injured, he still wanted to fight again. When he reached out to pull out the arrow in his body turned into a bunch of light threads, wrapped around him tightly, and tied him firmly to the black stone behind him. The long whip fell from his hand. The woman stood a few steps away, holding a giant bow and looking at him coldly. It is already clear who will win and who loses in this battle. The Vine Demon looked at Zhu Ti with eyes that were full of disbelief and resentment, but as his eyes glanced over the bougainvillea on the ground, he suddenly smiled. After a burst of red light, what was tied to the boulder was no longer the man in red, but a huge red tree. Being entangled in the original light, it is impossible to escape. The only possibility is the original form of this giant wood and vine demon. But what does he want to do when he takes on the original form? Zhu Ti frowned slightly. Suddenly a strong fragrance filled the room, like orchids and plums, which took away the heart and soul. The source of the strong fragrance is the giant red tree tied to the huge black stone. Zhu Ti instinctively felt that the fragrance was dangerous, so she took a step back and concentrated on forming seals. Golden light seals flew out from the fingers and hit the giant red tree. The light threads binding the giant tree suddenly wrapped tightly around the trunk, flickering brightly and dimly. The giant tree suddenly let out a howl as if it was dying. When the howl stopped, it collapsed to the ground. The strong fragrance in the prison gradually dissipated. The collapsed giant tree turned into a pile of dead branches and leaves in an instant. Only the stump had not completely withered, and a bright red twig remained at the corner. This vine demon was sexually assaulted, provocative, and seeking death. She didn't completely kill it. She even left a trace of its soul in the twig, which was considered a mercy. After taking care of the vine demon, Zhu Ti incorporated the strands of the original light into her body again. But just when she withdrew the last ray of light, a painful groan suddenly sounded from the vast ice prison. She looked back. Zongrong, who was unconscious on the ground, woke up at some point and the painful moan came from her mouth. On top of the ice, Zhenrong closed her eyes with an abnormal red color floating on her face. Accompanied by the pain, her fingers unconsciously scratched her body, probably with a lot of force, and there was a blood mark when she scratched. If he looks like this, he is either under witchcraft or poison. Zhu Ti's heart sank. She took 2 steps quickly, knelt down next to Zongrong, put one hand on her forehead, and used the technique of cleaning the spiritual platform on her. When the spell was first cast, Zongrong was quiet for a moment, but a moment later, she screamed in pain again. It seems that he is not trapped by evil magic, but poisoned. Zhu Ti stretched out her hand to feel for Zongrong's pulse. But she was not a doctor, so she could only find out that Bai Rong's blood was overheated and her mental energy was unstable, but nothing else could be found out. Most of the poisons in the world can cause these 2 symptoms. Trying to tell what kind of poison Bai Rong has been poisoned from these 2 symptoms is tantamount to fantasy. Unfortunately, the vine demon had just been dealt with too thoroughly by her and could not wake up to answer her question. In fact, if she knew what kind of cultivation the vine demon relied on, she would be able to guess what kind of poison she was poisoned by just the flush on her face and the heat of the blood in her body. But she didn't know. This is also due to the vine demon. He is obviously an evil demon who cultivates by harvesting female tonic, but he has a humble gentleman's face and a cold temperament. He is only dressed in red and looks a bit arrogant. It is completely impossible to distinguish him from this kind of cultivation. It makes it impossible to connect him with love poison. Yes, love poison. Evil demons like the vine demon naturally know a lot of charm techniques in order to force women to willingly become his spiritual materials for his cultivation. Previously, he had used his obsession to subdue Bo Rong and gave her love poison. This vine demon is actually a lover's vine that has been cultivated for tens of thousands of years. Lover's vine was originally the main material for making various love potions. Lover's vine has been cultivated for thousands of years. Its fragrance penetrates the blood and has aphrodisiac properties. Although Zhu Ti loves flowers, Gugu has never planted a lover's vine. She is not familiar with this plant, so she doesn't know that this vine demon is actually a lover's vine. The vine demon had already planted the love poison in Bo Rong before. Just now he transformed into his original body and released the fragrance of love. The fragrance awakened the poison in Bo Rong, which caused her to suddenly wake up and have a seizure. Zongrong seemed to be getting more and more uncomfortable, and the new blood marks on her face, neck, and arms were dazzling. Zhu Ti tried many methods, but could not relieve her pain. The cell door could not be opened for a while. Zhu Ti frowned for a moment and decided to transfer the poison in Zongrong's body to herself. The body of the God of Light can withstand all poisons in the world, and ordinary poisons will not cause any major harm to her. She couldn't bear to see Bo Rong continue to suffer. However, she didn't know that what Bo Rong was suffering from was love poison, and she didn't know that although the poison was a common poison, it only aroused people's desire and would not cause any harm to an immortal's immortal body or spiritual palace. Damage, so when her body comes into contact with it, she will not think it is a big problem and actively purify it, so she is not immune to this poison. That is to say, even if the poison of lover's vine enters her blood, it can also captivate her heart and stimulate her desire. This poison also works on her. But she was not at all on guard. In the ice room, Zhongron was trembling and sitting cross-legged on the ground. Zhu Ti sat behind Bo Rong, supporting her with one hand and separating a magical power with the other hand, guiding the magic power into Bo Rong's body and patiently detoxifying her. Zhu Ti introduced the poison to make her careful. After the poison entered her body with the magic power, Bo Rong's discomfort was also transferred to her. She felt hot, numb and itchy all over. She knew that this was because the poison had entered the blood. While the uncomfortable feeling was still weak, she immediately mobilized her spiritual power in order to use her spiritual power to separate the poison from the blood. But just as the spiritual power was roaming throughout her body, she suddenly felt a strange spiritual energy integrating into her soul consciousness. It was too late to block the spiritual breath, so she could only relax as much as possible, accept the spiritual breath, and at the same time mobilize her spiritual power, carefully bypassing the few remaining evil forces of the Western Emperor blade in her body, and crush the poison in her blood into a single particle. Small blood pills to calm the stomach. She succeeded. But at the moment of success, a strange picture suddenly appeared in his mind. It's that strange spiritual breath. She forced herself to compose herself. The originally static scene suddenly came to life after she calmed down. She saw clearly. It was a quiet side room. There are many lampstands and flower stands in the wing room. A thin rope was set up on one of the flower stands, and many seasonal flower notes were hung on it. The light shone on it, casting illusory shadows. Candles were burning on the lampstands and flower stands and on the ground. Amid the high and low candlelight sat a woman in red. The woman lowered her head and could only see her raven feather hair, but her face could not be seen clearly. There were unhurried footsteps outside the wing, and then a tall shadow was cast on the black onyx floor. The woman raised her head, her eyebrows were painted, her lips parted slightly, and she smiled lightly, "Your Highness." Following the woman's gaze, it could be seen that Lian Song, who was slightly younger than now, stepped into the room. While he was flipping through the flower paper, he looked up at the woman and said, "Chang'e." The picture froze at this moment and then turned into a ghost, replaced by another frame, and another scene was extended on that frame. Then, one scene after another. Most of those scenes only focus on Lian Song and Chang'e, and occasionally there are other people. But every scene is incomplete. More and more similar scenes flashed through her mind faster and faster, and disappeared faster and faster, almost making her dizzy. In the end, those scenes add up to a revolving door. The fixed consciousness jumped uncontrollably as the revolving lantern rotated, and finally came to the last scene. The last scene is also here, the 27-day demon locking tower. But in that scene, the demon locking tower had collapsed, and in the blood mist that filled the sky, Chang'e was pressed under a large stone, and that large stone was exactly the same as the mysterious stone standing in this ice prison. Chang'e's leg was crushed, and red blood flowed out from under the big rock, dyeing the sea of troubles not far away red. Lian Song squatted in front of her and looked down at her. The handsome divine king in white clothes has a very similar appearance and temperament to what he is today. Chang'e stared at Lian Song blankly and suddenly burst into tears. A drop of blood flowed from the corner of his eye. The blood drop rolled down to Lian Song's palm and condensed into a jade bead. Chang'e was in agony and burst into tears. "If there is an afterlife, Your Highness." Before she could finish her sentence, she held Lian Song's hand and repeated in a low voice, "If there is an afterlife." Divine consciousness surges. Zhuti covered her chest and suddenly spit out a mouthful of blood. The poisonous blood pill that was suppressed in his stomach suddenly exploded with the restlessness of his consciousness. But it was too late for her to care about this. She recognized the strange aura. That's Tangqi. In other words, it is a part of Tangqi. It was also the soul that was refined by her hands more than 200,000 years ago and turned into a red lotus seed after she sacrificed it, her last breath. It turns out that this is the origin of Tangqi, and the story in the revolving lantern is the past of Tangqi and Liansong. I see. This is really shocking. Tianbu followed Liansong closely and rushed to the demon-locking tower. When they arrived, His Highness the Third Highness had already entered the tower. Tianjiang fell to the ground outside the tower, and the only person standing was Yanlan. Yanlan stammered and told her the whole story, looking a bit genuinely worried. As soon as they finished speaking, Yanlan's maid who had fallen into the water ran over in a panic. Perhaps because of her presence, Yanlan and her maid didn't say anything, but when she wasn't paying attention, the two of them got into a few fights. Tianbu saw it, but she pretended not to. Not long after, His Highness the Third Prince came out, holding the unconscious god Zhuti in his arms, followed by an attendant who was transformed into a talisman and seal, and the attendant carried the unconscious Bei Rong on his back. Tianbu stepped forward quickly. His Highness the Third Highness did not stop, and, while walking towards 12 heavens, he ordered her to find Yao Jun immediately. Fortunately, Mr. Yao is here. When night fell, Tianbu rushed to Yao Jun's mansion with 100,000 fire and reported to Yao Jun according to the instructions of the Third Highness, saying that someone had been poisoned by the 10,000 years lover's vine. The Third Highness knew that he had the antidote, so he specially sent himself to ask for the medicine. Yao Jun is also a well-informed old man. He was surprised when he heard this. As far as I know, this lover's vine, which has been cultivated for thousands of years, is the only one in our 9th heaven. But the vine demon is well locked up in the demon-locking tower. When you say someone was poisoned, it couldn't be because he was poisoned, right? You have to rely on Yao Jun to save people, and it's not easy to make up lies. Tianbu nodded helplessly. Well, His Highness's friend accidentally broke into the demon-locking tower. Because the demon has no antidote, so... Yao Jun grabbed the medicine box and ran out of the house. As he ran, he said, the demon originally relied on the poison to lure the woman to cultivate with him. There is no antidote. The poison of the ordinary lover's vine is easy to cure, but that tree lover vine, I have to go over and take a look before talking about it. After Tianbu heard Yao Jun's words, he suddenly trembled when he thought about who had been poisoned. Isn't it impossible to cure it? Yao Jun's face was not good either. I can't say for sure. I can only go and take a look first, and I'll post it. Let her take the medicine and give it a try. Tianbu grabbed Yao Jun's arm and put forward a terrible idea. If your old medicine doesn't work, is it possible to find someone to do double cultivation to detoxify the poison? Yao Jun looked complicated. Yes. Let God Zhuti find someone to do double cultivation. Tianbu's legs became weak and he almost fell to his knees. Double cultivation. Who can I find to do double cultivation? Yao Jun sighed and gave her a rather practical suggestion. Find someone to do double cultivation. Good looking. Tianbu felt like he was going to faint. Everyone in Yao Jun's mansion was in a panic over this matter, but UNG Palace was very quiet at this time. In the inner room of the Xixin Hall, there is a bathing pool built with green frozen stone. The bathhouse was huge, taking up half the room. It is also very cleverly made. A naturally carved pool looks like a light green flowing cloud embedded in the white agate stone platform. One side of the bath is next to the window, and there's a narrow couch under the window. The window is open slightly high, and a few summer cherry blossoms can be seen tremblingly. On the other side of the bath, there are 7 continuous moonstone landscape screens. The pool was filled with ice-cold water. Zhuti leaned against the wall and soaked in the pool. In front of the landscape screen on her right stood 2 lanterns with 12 lamp bowls filled with candles. The candlelight danced, causing her, who was wrapped in this halo of warm yellow light, to sway slightly, as if she was awake. But Liansong knew that she did not wake up or move. She was obviously very quiet. Liansong was also sitting in the pool, with his back leaning against a strange stone that served as the background of the pool, with some distance between him and Zhu Ti. After learning from Yanlan's maid that she went to the demon-locking tower to save Boirong, he immediately rushed there, but she moved too fast, so he was still a step late. When they entered the tower, they saw a mess in the ice prison. The vine demon was beaten back to its original shape, leaving only a twig. Boirong was ignorant and she also fainted. Boirong was not poisoned. The love poison released by the vine demon was all over her body. And judging from the way she and Boirong were sitting in a coma, it was not difficult to guess that she had introduced all the love poison into her body. Exploring her pulse, he found that her body was in chaos, her consciousness was trembling, her spiritual power and magic power were out of control. The blood heat caused by love poison made her body boiling hot. And there was not much left of the originally insignificant Shihuang blade. Li also took advantage of the situation to cause chaos. One can imagine how uncomfortable she was and even fainted. But fortunately, there was nothing he could do except love poison. He had rich experience in dealing with the three powers in her body. After returning to Yuanji Palace, he immediately introduced the ice water into the pool and carried her into the pool to soothe her blood heat. At the same time, he himself entered the pool, calmed down, and tried to tame the uncontrollable power in her body. It was familiar once and twice. Maybe her body had adapted to the power of his soul, so as soon as his water power sneaked into her spiritual house, the out-of-control spiritual power and mana in her body became tamed. After the power of his soul circulated in her body for a week, the power of the Western Emperor's blade was also suppressed and silenced. At this point, only the poison of love remains unresolved. Her breathing was no longer as messy as before, but it was still a little rapid, probably due to the poison of love. Perhaps, when the love poison intensifies and the cold water in the pond cannot comfort her, she will wake up. He hoped Yao Jun would arrive before she woke up. And during this short period of time when she hadn't woken up, Yao Jun hadn't arrived, and no one could disturb them, he was finally able to take a good look at her. The candlelight was not clear, but in this dim candlelight, her delicate face was so clear, her eyebrows were like willow smoke, and her lips were like cherry blossoms. If her eyes were opened, he thought, he would still see that apricot-like face. Her eyes were as bright as the morning stars. He had drawn this face so carefully. At that time, he only thought that she was immortal, and that he should not and could not love her. With loss and pain, he drew a lifelike picture of Kuju for her. She liked that picture very much. That was 30,000 years ago. Yes, as early as 10 days ago, in the 10-mile peach forest, after taking the pills given to him by God Jiyan, all the memories that Emperor Donghua had worked so hard to weave for him were washed away. Guangsha, when the water was gone, the lush oasis hidden behind was revealed, allowing him, a man who was thirsty for water, to finally find the sustenance he was looking for in his instinctive veins. He remembered everything that happened between him and her in the mortal world 30,000 years ago. He remembered that they had met at a ferry in the mortal world. He had used an ivory fairy to trick her into calling his brother Lian San for a whole year. He had set off a bright firework for her in Ping'an City. He had thought if he took her to the underworld to resolve her knot. He also remembered that he was alienated from her because of the difference between immortals and mortals, and that she was determined to marry far away, but he regretted it so much that he split the earth and created the sea for her. Finally, in the realm of Zaijiali, he took Nilin as his betrothal and begged for help. She became his wife. As his memory recovered, he seemed to experience the past again, and her smile, her tears, her joy, and her sadness came to mind one by one, affecting his emotions so truly and vividly. What comes back is not only the memory, but also the raging love that was sealed as the memory disappeared. He remembered those loves without missing a single trace. And he also remembered those pains. The last memory he kept of her was that he gave her peace and made a promise with her. After the punishment was over, he went to the mortal world to find her. But in the end, when he went to the mortal world, what he got was the bad news that she had been harmed by the Tangqi and would never wake up again. That bad news gave him pain that was bone-piercing and heart-piercing. In anger, he descended on the North Sea and caused the whole North Sea to collapse. But even if he did this, it seemed to be meaningless. Locking up Nalingyu would not bring her back to sleep. The extreme pain and despair destroyed him, making him cold and disheartened. Just when he was about to hang up his seal and leave, the emperor appeared and took him back to Bihai. Then when he woke up, he forgot about her. 30,000 years ago, their ending ended in tragedy, which made him feel enough hopeless pain. At that time, I thought she was a mortal self, immersed in pain and despair, and didn't realize there was anything wrong with this ending. Of course, in the 10-mile peach forest, he recalled everything when all the love and pain returned, and after great joy and sorrow, as his rationality returned, he was finally able to think about some things calmly, and then he had doubts. Obviously, when he was tortured in Tangqi Mountain in the North Pole, she had returned and became a god. Why was it that when he finished his torture and went to the mortal world to see her, she still had an undiscoverable body while lying on the embroidered bed? Shit Xianza's mortal body? And how virtuous and capable is the mausoleum fish in the North Sea that can harm the returning god of light? Furthermore, when he wanted to hang up his seal and leave after bringing disaster to Beihai, the emperor deceived him into Bihai by saying that he might be able to revive her. After reshaping his memory, could the emperor really awaken her? Got her? If she was awakened, why did she sleep for another 30,000 years? And why did the emperor rewrite his memory at that time? And now that she's back, why doesn't she remember anything about their past? All of this is weird, so weird that it seems that since 30,000 years ago, there are huge secrets buried in her that cannot be known to him. He didn't know whether the secret was good or bad, but he was worried about it for no reason. And this kind of panic seemed to indicate something ominous. He knew that he needed to find the answers to these questions as soon as possible, which was very important, and to answer these questions, he could not ask the emperor. If there is no reason to do so, the emperor will not rewrite his memory at will. If the emperor knew that he had recovered his memory, he would probably lose his memory again if he followed his way. So the next day, he left Shirley Talin and rushed to Gugu, hoping that Zhao Shi and Yin Lin could answer his questions. It was his instinct to prepare for a rainy day, so on the way to Gugu, he thought about how he could make the two divine envoys talk if they were unwilling to answer his questions. He also thought that even if they gave extremely bad news, it wouldn't matter much. He had even experienced almost losing her completely. What could be worse than that? He was ready. No matter what kind of secret she was carrying, he would accept it and bear it with her. And after visiting Gugu, he will immediately return to Jichangshan to see her. He will remind her of their past and will fulfill her promise to stay with her forever, which is 30,000 years late for both of them. Agreement. From now on, they don't have to worry about anything anymore. Everything will be fine in the future. He thought that way at that time, and he really believed that way. How could one have expected that maybe nothing in this world would be worse than losing her, but something could be as bad as this? In the Rain Pavilion by the Sea of Eternal Life, Emperor Zhaoxi told him that Qingyu was indeed the reincarnation of Zhu Ti. Jingchen was lost that year and could not be used. Qingyu waited for him for several years and couldn't bear to miss him. He asked Yin Lin to take her into the wilderness to find him. Unexpectedly, by chance, he met his mortal body and returned early. After Zhu Ti returned, the person he saw after finishing the water torture and going to the mortal world was actually not Zhu Ti, but a doll that Zhu Ti made for him before falling into a new round of sleep. The doll couldn't wake up because Zhu Ti forgot to wake up the new soul when he created the mortal soul for the doll. She separated her memory as Chengyu from her soul and put it into the mortal soul. Zhao, she said calmly, according to her plan, the doll will wake up when the soul bead merges with the body. Become a brand new Chengyu. That Chengyu will remember everything about you and will stay with you on her behalf. This story should have a happy ending. But she forgot to awaken the new soul, so that even though the soul bead was integrated into after taking the body of the doll, the new Qingyu could not wake up. But she hopes you think that the doll is the Qingyu you want. As divine envoys, how can we disobey the arrangement of the God Lord? Yinlin can't. I had no choice but to make up a story about Lingyu breaking into Shawalu and harming her, and changing the memories of everyone in Shawalu to make you believe it. But Lingyu also deserved her punishment and was not innocent, so you don't have to punish her. And feel guilty. Oh, and also, 30,000 years ago, in that mortal world, you couldn't tell that Au was the Lord, and I don't blame you. The mortal body she used at that time was made by Xieming. Don't blame you. Even Emperor Donghua and Ziluofu of the Western Brahma realm saw Au at that time, and they probably couldn't recognize that she was the reincarnation of his lord, and that the soul of the god of light lived in her body. The same mortal body, Xia the god of Hades made 18 dolls for your majesty's reincarnation, and the doll she left to you is the last one, so you should not see that the doll is different from Au. They are originally the same. Jiaoshi explained everything clearly. He was silent for a long time, waiting for the tea to cool down in the pavilion. He asked Jiaoshi one last question. She gave away her memory about me to the doll, so she forgot about me. Why did she make a doll to replace herself? Why did the emperor change my memory? These days, he often thinks about how much better it would have been if he hadn't asked this question. Why is he asking this question? And now, at this moment, soaking in the spring pool, just recalling Jiaoshi's answer at that time, the evil fire is spreading again in the spiritual platform. He remembered clearly that at that time, when she heard his question, Jiaoshi was stunned for a moment, and then her expression showed pity, because she felt that the mortal love with you was a stain. The god of light possesses Wuguo. The spirit of the soul went to the mortal world to reincarnate and practice, indeed in order to understand what love, evil, and lust are all about. She protects the mortal world and is eager to understand the human race better, so she made such a decision. But this does not mean that she wants to experience those worldly feelings. Your obsessive entanglement with her stained the god of light's innocent soul, making her think about it with great hatred. But you were also innocent, so she stripped away those memories and made a doll for you. Zhuti is Zhuti, Chengyu is Chengyu, so you can be considered clean. But as I said just now, this matter failed. Jiaoshi sighed softly, with deeper pity in her expression. That person was identified that day. It's Au. I don't need to say more about you who mistakenly thought she would never wake up again. Emperor Donghua felt that he couldn't let you go on like this, so he changed your memory. At this point, Jiaoshi's expression became quite complicated. Actually, I think you have lived quite well these past 30,000 years. Why do you have to force fate and have to think of this period again? Jiaoshi's answer made his mind go blank. He had never thought that she would view their relationship this way after returning. Now he has forgotten most of his feelings at that time. He only remembers that when he came back to his senses, the fire burning in the spiritual platform spread into his spiritual palace in an almost self-destructive manner, and his consciousness lost control again. Even more so than last time. When I opened my eyes again, I was in a 10-mile peach forest. This time it was Yinlin sitting in front of him. Jiaoshi may lie to him, but Yinlin has always followed Zhuti and has no selfish motives in doing things. He is the most powerful envoy of Guyu Mountain. He couldn't think of any reason for Yinlin to lie to him. But Yinlin did not deny Jiaoshi's words. Yinlin was silent for a long time in front of his bed, and finally said solemnly, I can only tell you that everything Jiaoshi said is true. He endured the biting chill in his heart and replied to Yinlin, really. After a while, he said to Yinlin, after she returned to godhood, she came to the North Pole Tangqi Mountain to meet me once. After the memories forced upon him by the emperor were washed away, the real past floated in the river of memories. Regarding Zhu Ti's appearance in Tangqi Mountain, his original memory was actually very hazy. It was as if he saw Ziti, but she didn't come close, and he didn't even see her face clearly at that time. While he was being tortured by the blade, he seemed to have been distracted by thinking about who it was, but this question did not bother him for too long, because he couldn't bear the pain of the sharp blade and quickly passed out. After he passed out, he seemed to have had a dream in which someone treated his injuries. When he woke up again, he found himself lying next to the cold pool where he had been tortured, with no trace of any scars on his body. The two generals said that they were guarding outside the valley that night and were not sure what happened in the valley. However, they concluded that he could not bear the pain of the punishment and failed to control his strength before passing out, so they bound him. The chain was broken. As for his injuries, Xiaolingye ran around in those few days and came back with a lot of healing elixirs. Maybe she helped take care of them. At that time, he accepted what the heavenly general said. But now that I think about it, although he did have the ability to break the iron chain that bound him, was it really him who broke it? Was the injury on his body really cured by Lingyu? He always knew how to talk to people in order to get the truth out of the other person's mouth as quickly as possible, so even though he was not sure, he still asked Yinlin with great determination, "If she really hates me as you said, why did you come to see me? Why did you heal my injury?" Yinlin showed surprise, but only for a moment. "She told me that she erased this memory of yours. Even if she was unable to do so at the time and the erasure was not thorough enough, you would only think it was a dream, not a dream. To think you still remember." Yinlin did not deny that it was her who came to see him and treat him at that time, but what he said next was not what he expected. "She doesn't hate you, she just doesn't want to accept you. In the past, she went to see you and heal your injuries, because at that time she had not yet stripped the memories of Chengyu out of her immortal body. Those memories made her painful. She could not accept her love for you and could not stay with you for the rest of her life. Therefore, the memory also makes her feel guilty towards you. Going to see you to save you from suffering under the punishment of the flowing blade is out of guilt for you, and she wants to make it up to you. But she does all this just for her own peace of mind. Because she felt at ease, she could peel off Chengyu's memories without any distractions." After saying these words, Yinlin sighed softly, his expression implying advice and warning. "In your eyes, she is her. Chengyu is Chengyu. They are not the same person. Chengyu has passed away, and your majesty, don't bother her with this matter anymore." This explanation is very hurtful, but it is indeed very logical. In fact, there is nothing wrong with Zhao Shi's words and Yinlin's words. He really wanted what they said to be untrue, but he really couldn't think of any other reason that would make Zhu Ti take the initiative to strip away the memory of him and cruelly decide to leave a doll for him as her replacement. He forgot how to speak. There was a restless fire in front of the coffin, but his heart felt cold. After regaining the ability to speak, he finally asked Yinlin a question. "She said they are not the same person? How could they not be the same person?" "What?" This question was so helpless. Rather than asking Yinlin, it was better to say that he was asking himself. How could he not be alone? In addition to the life with her, he had also been to the human world in the past. He once used his immortal soul to enter the mortal body prepared for him by Emperor Donghua and experienced several lives in the mortal world. The soul is his soul, and the mortals who have experienced it are certainly his. What's the difference between him going to the mortal world to practice and Zhu Ti going to the mortal world to practice? But she insisted on separating herself as a god from herself as a mortal in that life. Wasn't Ayu's soul in that life her soul? She used her body and soul to enter the mortal world to practice and experienced one life, but she insisted on saying that she was not her in that life. How ridiculous. After she returned to godhood, she was unwilling to accept her past with him. Perhaps she was like those mortals who had attained enlightenment and regarded their former mortal relationships as mustard dust after their ascension. The beauty is still the beauty. There is no change, but the thoughts are no longer the same as before. Just like a lover who has changed her heart, she is still the lover she was yesterday, but she has changed her heart, and this is the most despairing thing. She changed her heart, changed her mind, and believed that the world of mortals could no longer tarnish her innocent soul of the god of light. This is her Taoist heart as a god. In the face of such Tao Xian, he can't even fight for it anymore, because his love is not worth mentioning. Not only was it not worth mentioning, it was a karma that she hated, something she desperately wanted to strip away. He originally thought that after restoring their past memories and getting rid of the difference between immortals and mortals, no matter what they encountered now, they would not experience the same tragedy as they did 30,000 years ago. Little did he know that recovering his memory would be the beginning of new pain. It's really hard to tell which situation is worse, losing your loved one or having your loved one change your mind. Lin looked at him for a long time and sighed in a low voice. God Jian said that you have a demon in your heart. After a while, he added, I forgot that God treats you better. You shouldn't think about it, stand up. Snort. A soft cry brought Lian Song back from his thoughts. He raised his eyes. It was Zidi who snorted. She is about to wake up. He rubbed his forehead. Several summer cherry blossoms fell into the pool at this time, and their pink and white petals were dotted in the pool, swaying and making a few tiny ripples. He looked at the fallen flowers. Isn't his relationship with her just like this summer cherry blossom? It's a flower that is limited by the season. It is only fragrant and sweet in the season. When the season passes, it can only detach from the branch bitterly. Although it's still as beautiful as ever. He never wanted it to fall, he wanted to keep it and make it fragrant and sweet forever, but the initiative was not in his hands. The initiative is never in his hands. Because his lover has changed his heart. In order to keep the innocent soul of the God of Light, she will never love anyone again. Thinking of this, his amber pupils suddenly darkened. The thought really got on his nerves. His consciousness began to churn violently again. Evil fire and gunpowder smoke rose up in front of the spiritual altar, and 100 battles seemed to be going on in his body, and his heart was instantly filled with all kinds of dark thoughts. He realized that something was wrong with him, and immediately sealed it with the suppressing mantra on the right side of his heart. While suppressing the raging malice in his heart, he remembered what Jian said to him when he left 10 miles of Peach Grove. If I had known that a trip to Gyu Mountain would give you inner demons, I would have stopped you no matter what I said in the first place. But the matter is over. Hey, inner demons are hard to get rid of. You should remember the soul-soothing spells I taught you carefully. If it relapses, you should take care of your immediate needs first. He tried chanting mantras and adjusting his breathing. But the violence in his heart was difficult to appease. He stood up suddenly, water splashing everywhere. In the splashing water, a hand grasped his clothes. The force was not strong. He was defenseless and was dragged down into the water. His back was hit by the strange stone that he could lean on, and it hurt a little, but he didn't have time to feel the pain. A pair of snow-white arms hugged him up, and a soft body pressed up against him, then wrapped around him tightly like a snake or a vine. Zidi woke up, but not awake. Love poison attacks. She didn't know what she was doing. Her body felt so hot that the icy water around her became too warm, making her uncomfortable. Because she felt too uncomfortable, she wanted to leave the water. Under the influence of the soul-suppressing spell, Lian Song was like an iceberg, sitting quietly a few feet away from her. So she followed her instinct to find him, clung to him, and used every inch of her body that seemed to be burning to press against the ice that made her feel comfortable. She is not awake, but is he sober? Just each other. Lian Song lowered his eyes to look at the person in his arms. She had her eyes closed, so he couldn't see her star-like eyes. He could only see her long eyelashes like little feather fans soaked in water, trembling cutely but feebly. The bottom of the snow-white skin showed a hint of femininity, stained with a few drops of water, vivid and a little charming. He was actually very familiar with her look like this. It was not like he had never bathed with her in the little Jiaoqing realm. Too dangerous, he thought. The Buddhist sound of the calming mantra rang in his mind, and for a moment, he felt that he should push her away. But she clung to him and sat on his lap without any knowledge. She wrapped her hands around his neck and pressed her face tightly against his heart, panting slightly due to the poison of love. The sound of breathing amplified infinitely, occupying every corner of his mind. The Buddhist sound of the calming mantra was suppressed, pushed, and finally expelled from his mind without leaving any trace. The suppressed evil thoughts and desires surged up in an instant. This is the love he has changed his mind about, the love he could never have again. But there is such an opportunity. He can get her again, even if it is just her body, just for a moment. Should he seize this opportunity? Of course you have to grasp it. Why wouldn't he? He picked her up suddenly. There was a soft couch by the pool, and he threw her on it. Then he leaned down and enveloped her completely, releasing all the violence in his heart. He controlled her hands with his hands, pressed his legs against hers, pressed his lips against hers, pushed his tongue against her teeth, and stirred her mouth wantonly, making her breathless and trying to struggle, but unable to break free. But she didn't struggle too much. Her response was great. Perhaps due to the poison of love, even if he made her uncomfortable, she would just shake her head slightly and try to avoid him. It's okay if she can't hide from him. She accepts him completely and allows him to be arrogant on her. But this aroused his sadistic desire even more. He rubbed her shoulders, back, and waistline vigorously, and bit her lips even more fiercely. But he let go of her hands and legs as a reward for her compliance. Her eyes opened at some point, panting and looking at him blankly. He stopped and reached out to trace her eyebrows. "Are you saying that you are not alone?" As a god, how are her eyebrows, eyes, nose, and lips different from those of a mortal? He lowered his head and continued to kiss her hard. She hugged him tightly and let him entangle her. Only when he hurt her, her fingers grabbed his clothes hard. Both were panting. "Are you saying that you are not alone?" How many times had she had this kind of expression and body movements when she was lingering with him in the little Jiaoqing realm? Even if you forget everything, your instinct will never be forgotten. If it's not the same person, how can you have the same instinct? He thought so as he pressed his forehead against hers, trying to calm and ease the growing restlessness in his body. But now, she only has the instinct of lust for him. But his love for her was instinctive. She is his true love. Just like Tangqi said, true love is whether you remember it or forget it, whether you are alive or dead. No matter how many times you come back, the one who will see you forever can only be her. Love, just like destiny, is a mysterious thing. Before Qingyu, even he couldn't tell how many people had been around him, but when she turned into a mortal and appeared in front of him, he could only see her. Then he forgot about her. Thousands of women came and went from Yuanji Palace, and he never felt the slightest move. But when she appeared in Ankanana Palace, she raised her head and smiled at him, and so quickly, she fell in love again. His heart. She had so many identities. He was not smart enough to distinguish them, but his heart could tell them immediately. It was as if he was very confused, but his heart was extremely smart, and it was hers. As long as she, and only she, could step into it. He paused when he realized this. He had never bullied her like this. He thought he wanted to bully her like this. Her unwillingness to accept him made him miserable and despairing. He thought this was the punishment he wanted to give her. But punishing her like this, seeing her show her vulnerable posture, he felt the pain before she did. Yes, he loves her, but if she causes him pain and despair again, can he punish her like this? He cannot. The fire that was pouring into the Ling mansion, making him anxious and violent, became smaller, and gradually extinguished. He released his hold on her, and the kiss became no longer entirely offensive. He began to comfort her. Start kissing her very softly. They kissed in silence for a long time. He stopped when her fingers followed instinct and dug into his soaked clothes. After a pause, he pulled her hand away and smiled bitterly at her who was unconscious. "You don't want me to continue." She looked at him confusedly and bit his chin. He kissed her for another moment, then finally pulled away from her. When she wanted to continue, he cast a spell to make her faint. Sanity is back. He became a good person again. His hands caressed her neck, chest, arms, and waist, removing the marks he had put on her body. In fact, he should have erased the memory of their intimacy from her unconscious mind. When she wakes up, will she not be able to bear it if she remembers that they were like this, and it was her who took the initiative? Does this count as tarnishing her innocent soul? But the trick of erasing memory between fingers failed to be used in the end. He lowered his head to her ear and cast a psychological spell on her, You will think this is just a dream. He didn't want her to hate him, but he wanted her to remember him. There was a stinging pain in his head that made him almost faint. This is the sequelae of memory recovery, and it is also a new disease added to him by his inner demons. Tianbu reported in a low voice from outside, "Your Highness, Master Yao has arrived." He arranged her clothes, got down from the couch, and said calmly, "Let him come in." End of chapter 21, book 3.